Hi everyone, welcome back. So last week we were talking about strategies and ideas about implementing the plan. But once we get involved in this, we really start thinking about what actually can we do to mitigate and create this strategy and implement the strategy itself. We first started talking about preparing for those impacts. We talked about key processes. Well, what's a key process again? Well, it might be, if we're thinking about that on the line positions, which ones are the most important? The ones that we'd want to repair first, to look at, to consider about how much time and investment is needed to focus to keep everything going. Where are these key areas? And inside this, we always have a breakdown. Let's think about this again. Let's talk about it as we're working on our classes and we had a breakdown here at the university. What if the IT went down? What can we do to still manage our classes? We're virtual, we're online. How can we facilitate this? Well, there's always alternatives. I thought about this. What happens if I can't get the information to you from D2L? Maybe D2L goes down totally. We lose it for the semester. We can still continue. So I started thinking about backup plans. I use YouTube to catalog all the videos, so if one's not working, I can give you guys a quick link. It also has hearing impaired captions on them, so everybody can still utilize the information. It also has a third-party vendor. We could go to the public library and use virtualization there, tap into their computers. So we can find critical ways to get around this. Just because the platform is down does not mean that our business would stop and our teams would work. What if we had another tornado here? Now we can't have a physical structure. Again, I put that plan in place. What would happen? What would I do? Well, I could go to the public library. There's multiple here, and I found locations, and I called them and asked what sources they have for me to use, from hardware to software. And could I come in and do public speaking there? Could I work in a quiet area? Could I utilize one of the public rooms to create a lecture for you and still get it out to my YouTube links? Yes. So I have a backup plan in case this already happens. What happens if I lose all my strategy and everything and all my planning that I have on my personal computer? Well, I have backups for that as well. I have a few different types, and we'll talk about those critical areas in which I implemented for plans to keeping my data safe so I can always have my information stored for you. A couple of those ideas really link back to IT dependency. If we're only using one drive and it breaks, I drop it on the way in because I use my laptop a lot, what would happen? Well, I back everything up on not one, but not two, but 3 hard drives. I have one in the office, one in my car I usually keep or carry with me in my bag, and one at home. So 3 different areas in case fire, tornado, or something would happen. They're in 3 different locations. But I even do something else called virtualization of all my data, and I do it as a continuum. And this is one of the plans that a lot of big businesses are doing today. And it's an expense, but it allows you to be back online instantaneously. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a program I use, and it's similar that I used and instituted in one of my businesses that I've had for years in photography. More importantly, we have to remember about that knowledge persons. And I bring this back up because it's one of the things that's always left out of plan. Who are those key people that know everything? They know the whole system. They know how to get the backups. They know the passwords. They know every single rule. They've worked in a company for years and they can do anything. These are key persons you have to understand about how you would replace them or what you would do. They are part of that recovery time and scope plan. You have to think of this. If you don't have those key people or those go away, how do you implement new ideas? How do you get the knowledge they have out? Should you be, in part of your planning, having strategy meetings where everybody records and takes information and learns from each other in a mentoring program? This is a cycle of making sure you're continuously meeting your obligations and making sure that everybody has a part and stake in the whole business orientation. We always want to make sure that we're thinking about remote work sites. Like I said, I thought, well, I could go to the public library. I checked out 2, one in Macon, one in Forsyth, in a couple different areas. I also know that I was back home. I have 3 or 4 options there. I also asked my neighbor if I could ever use his if everything goes down in my site at home. This gives us a competitive business impact advantage over others. The more pre-planning on routing sites, locations, using different hardware and software, and making sure all of our allocations are available to us is the first step in making sure our strategy for handling impacts is equally and prepared from anyone else's and gives us the advantage. So mitigating strategies, it's always that cost versus time, or which one you want to choose from. I like to look at it a little differently. How do we avoid these things from even being effective to where we'd have to sit down once something happens, once we have an impact, and try to decide? Well, I always think of it as risk avoidance. How do we avoid this? A lot of times you think about the idea of a teenager driving a car. Well, in this world today, there's many things we can utilize to make sure teenagers don't wreck. When I was growing up, it was a constant thing where I'd see peers wrecking cars, being dangerous. Well, I looked at it, and my parents looked at it the same way, and you might do with your kids someday, if you have them. And think about, how do we avoid accidents? Well, the first thing was, well, let's see how we educate ourselves better. I took driving tests, defensive driving and offensive driving, 2 different courses from AAA. And I also had a third party that I went to, and it was actually a race car style driving place, and they taught you evasive maneuvers. I watched videos, I trained myself. So we have many tools like that today. There's also technology that we can institute into a car, called a governor. Think about this system where you can digitally monitor what your child is doing. You can buy quick software and plugins into your actual computer in your car, and you can see how fast or slow they're going. You can track. You can even use their iPhone to see where they're at, and locations if they're not allowed to be in a certain area. These are all different strategies to avoid problems and work with them. These are also ways to take down your risks, make limitations, set bars to where you're willing to go. We could think about this in our car reference or analogy again. You could tell your son, your daughter, you're not allowed on the freeway. You're not allowed on the highway. You're never allowed to go above 50 miles an hour in a vehicle. You're not allowed to drive at night. This is a place where driving is impaired. You could put up different aspects into your car just like the police will do for DUI drivers today, that they will have a mechanism to where you have to blow into to make sure that you are not drinking. You could do this to your teenagers and make sure that there's no alcohol involved. You could put all kinds of sensors and monitors into a vehicle today that transmit real-time data back to you. There's also ways you could look at it for risk transference. You could tell your son, you know what, you're not old enough. You're going to use the bus. So you can take away the risk and put it on a third party and have your child using a bus to go to school. Or maybe there's more public transportation. Maybe you get into a riding sharing situation to where your son or daughter rides with somebody else and you share the rides. It cuts down half of the limitations for you. Then we have to think about the risk acceptance. And sometimes we're going to have to let them drive. We're going to have to let them grow up. The same thing as if we're doing with the IT. We're going to have to understand that there can be risks, and we have to do this to make good business. We have to take internet and global strategies into mind when we know we open ourselves up to attacks. The larger and more robust our system is, the more it's dependent on the internet. These are things that you have to think about and take risk into acceptance and ideas. A lot of times we come back to this idea, it's more about the recovery requirements. And we think about this as functional aspects, that getting the line moving again so the product comes back out. We've talked many a times about these plans, and these are some of the things that should be in your plan. The first is always relocation options. What if the building is on fire? You can't work into it, and you've lost all this. We've already thought about having backup storage and everything that's happened. What if our backups are destroyed in a fire? Is there a relocation option? Can you share business space with a sister company or a parent company? Can you, if you're part of another organization or say a national chapter and you're part of a union, can you ask for help from them to relocate temporarily? Can you ask your local high schools for help? Third-party vendors are always an option, but they're cost involved. You have to understand the limitations, and it may be a pre-established requirement that automatically, if there's a fault, your third-party vendors pick up where you are in your processes. These are part of the backup systems. I was talking about mine. I back up 3 times, but I have a 4th. The 4th is a continuous, and that's something we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. But how do we get to these parts? How do we move to this? Well, the number one way is we have a team set up for crisis or crisis center and communications. As soon as something happens, the crisis team goes in place. And we have to have a way to communicate. Mobile phones, Skype. Maybe we get on to a massive recovery team communication aspect on the internet if it's possible from third-party sites. Maybe we all meet at a coffee shop across the road if there's a fire. But number one is understanding how the crisis center sets up and the communication team gets to communicate with each other so that they can activate the plan and organize the workforce. Recovery options are always something that you have to think about. There's key persons, as we've talked about, in that knowledge transfer. What happens if somebody goes out sick? How do we transfer that knowledge? Is there methods established? Do we have key rules set up so that when people are working in their job, they take key notes and they take processes in mind and they write this down so it can easily transfer to someone else so they can pick up this information? Are the alternative facilities actually prepared for our needs? Have we checked them out? Have we ran tests to make sure this happens? Have we run the fire drill, as I like to say? Are these prescribed as prearranged elements so that when this happens, the crisis team activates it? And it's as simple as moving the workforce and calling a third-party vendor, opening the doors to your second place, getting a key. These are all things that have to be in that recovery option plan and thought about. The more prearranged and more tested they are for faults that can be rechanged and re-implemented into plans, the better the plan will be for full recovery. That's strategic cycle, as I like to call it, in recovery. Obviously the first thing we're looking at is in IT is recovering that data. There's ways to do this, and the first aspect is usually weighed out in cost. You have to compare and contrast the cost of the services if you're using a third-party vendor. Hiring additional workforce to help you. Bringing in union labor might be extremely more expensive than having your people on overtime. You have to understand the risk needs to be accepted and evaluated. This should be in your plan. It has a 3 or 4 stage evaluation, and what is implemented might not be the best for scope or speed, but it might be the best for cost. These are things that you'd have to weigh with the key stakeholders. This is where your plan's firewalls are at stake, and you actually test and test again to see which is the most effective route. Maybe you have a transference agreement. Think about this. A lot of times in communication models, such as wireless communications, they all share towers. So if Verizon's tower goes down, they still have airtime bought on other towers to keep your mobile devices working. It doesn't just stop. They have backups and transfers agreements and contracts in place. This is just a matter of pulling a switch. It's the same thing with the old idea and adage of the railroad. If one rail goes down, you simply pull the switch and route the trains to another rail system. These are all based on time, cost, and effective solutions. One might not work in a different situation, so you might have to have 2 or 3 different plans in effect. What happens if there's a total power outage might not be the same as if there's a minor fire in one side of your building, that you can still work out of the building. These are planned strategy cycles you need to think about. There's always many different pre-established protocols. And we were talking a little bit about this in the beginning, and I'm going to talk a little deeper. And back to my analogy with my computer. So I back up my systems daily. I don't wait for it to happen. I anticipate it to happen. I've had many of laptop computers fail. I had a Dell fail one time years ago because I caught a virus. It destroyed everything and I lost all of my work. I had to redo every single assignment that I was working on. And at that time I was studying in my master's degree and writing my master's thesis, just like you guys are looking to do. And I lost half of my data. I had to restart, rewrite hundreds of pages of work. Terrible. So at that point I started learning about backups. And not just a backup that's with me at all times, where I carry in a car, but one in the office, one at home. I also looked into the idea of virtualization. Many of companies are doing this. I have a continuous virtual backup on my computer. As long as it's logged into the internet, it is backing up full time. My phone and my laptop and my desktop at home. All of them are separately backed up constantly virtually. I use a third party called Carbonite. It's a system to where from anywhere in the world I can log in and re-download my entire desktop onto another machine and lose nothing. The virtualization is instant. It is completely 100% established by the third party and routed to them. They maintain all the work. They look at everything for threats and let me know if there is a threat on my computer or a file and eliminate it and stop. This is something that a lot of large organizations are doing today. It is costly, yes. I pay a couple $100s a year for the service. An organization might pay a couple $100,000 for the service. But we have to look at it as what is the cost of downtime? What if I lost 6 months of work that I've done for you for this course? I would have to go back and reread, redo, set up new PowerPoints, record new videos, make new lecture series overall. How much time do I have to do that? How frustrated would you be? You'd be upset if you couldn't listen to me, couldn't get your lectures. So this is all things I think about for you. The same as any organization builds into their plan. They have to think about these backup cycles as well and what's the most effective. A lot of times these mirrored sites, as I'm talking about, they're hot sites. You can lease space from a vendor. You don't have to fully own it or fully have your system in another location. You can have what's called a warm site as well. These are rented facilities. The university has rented space in different buildings. I've worked for many universities along the way that will rent a floor out so that people can work out of the floor in a different area. They'll have mobile sites. As far as teaching, I had one time a mobile trailer. To when the school had a fire, we had a trailer that was brought in and we were able to still teach out of the trailers. They were connected in for wireless services, and actually through Verizon helped us, and we were able to still keep working. There's cold sites. It might be a site that you use where you store all your old computers and you can go and bring back up online with the transference of the data. If you're using virtualization, it's as simply as downloading all your backed up material. But these are all places of independent storage. They're thinking about making a possible data mart and a mirrored storage. A lot of you have looked at data marts and the differences between having everything in one basket or multiple data marts and small marts. In case one goes down, you only have to have one brought back up. There's a big debate over that versus Impel versus Kimmel, but that's outside of our scope. So I found a little fun clip I want to play for you guys on diagnosing the problems.
Because your organization's IT infrastructure is critical to business continuity, in the event of a natural or man-made disaster, you most likely already have a secure and well-designed disaster recovery site. It's fair to say that in the event of a disaster, you need fast and secure access to your disaster recovery site. You can manage your DR site's routers, switches, firewalls, and Unix servers remotely through the network. But what happens if the network is down? Then you need an out-of-band solution. An out-of-band solution ensures you can still get access, regardless of the devices or the network's condition, enabling remote diagnostics and problem fixing. Ensuring access to your disaster recovery site via an over-IP connection is vital, but you should also have a secondary dial-up connection available. It's important to note that remote access and control is as vital for your regular data center as it is for your disaster recovery site. And for a consolidated view of all your remote access technologies, such as service processors and KVM over IP, Best Practice recommends a single source software tool to give you this view. The benefits to you of such a solution are security, traffic encrypted so you are compliant and secure, guaranteed access when your network is down or your device is hung up, A sound investment. Better utilization of manpower and increased uptime. A real justifiable ROI. It's proven. Out-of-band remote access to your disaster recovery site is your insurance policy against costly downtime and for business-critical continuity. Let our experience make your experience.
So it brought in a good perspective on this and making sure that you have all these alternatives. I thought that was a cute little video I saw and kind of interesting, putting all these ideas together. One of the big things, and I want you guys to think about, is having a crisis team in place in your plan. First, inside of that, you have a defined set of rules for each crisis team member. Who are they reporting to themselves? How do they orchestrate everything? They understand how to move the hardware to software, change the virtualization, where they're supposed to go, and what's supposed to happen. Their tasks are clearly defined, and they work together as a team and constantly communicate. They assign resources as needed, and it's according to the critical path of what needs to be done first. They identify the milestones, and once they reach a milestone, they communicate correctly to the other crisis team members who create a path to the stakeholders of the president. This might go to the board. These are all communication methods, but if they understand this process and there's one key person who's on the team, it makes it a little easier and less stress on the employees. They make sure all the alternative teams have tests done, that they are the fire drill inspector, and report back to the team members to make sure there's alternatives if there is errors found inside of the plan. And of course, once they have this plan in place, test again, and revise that team's plan. The more testing we do, the more we know. It's easier to find bugs when we're practicing than when we're trying to deal with them in real time when there is a crisis. It's never a fact of if it's going to happen. It's always a fact of when will something happen. When will it impact? Having a crisis team in place that's constantly drilled and working on these ideas is one of the most effective ways to make sure your business continuity is rolling down the hill. Gang, thanks for listening to this one. A little different. I brought in some different ideas about mitigating the problems, avoiding the risks, and implementing ideas to help you out. I brought in an idea of what I do personally. Maybe you should back your stuff up too. That way I don't ever have to hear, "My dog ate my paper." Have a great week, gang. I look forward to your work, and I'll talk to you soon.